Good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the GCSP public discussion on Ecological Threat Report 2024, analyzing ecological threats, resilience, and peace. Welcome to the audience here at the GCSP, as well as to all of you joining us online, and as well to all of you who will be watching the recording in a few days or weeks or even months. My name is Anna Brach, and I'm the head of human security here at the GCSP, and I have the pleasure and privilege to chair this session. We are here to talk about the links between ecological threats, resilience, and peace. These links are even more important today than ever before, with the growing insecurity in the peace and security landscape, with focus and policy directions moving more towards geopolitical affairs, moving more into conflict considerations, etc., etc. And the changes in the world are actually moving our policymakers a little bit away from this very, very important conversation. And as I heard somebody say that, climate change, nature crisis, biodiversity crisis are not going to wait for us to sort out other security issues so that we can then come back to them when we have time and resources to deal with those. So to talk about this and beyond, and really to delve into the report, we have with us three excellent speakers. First, we will hear from Serge Stroobants, who is the Director of Europe and MENA region at the Institute for Economics and Peace. He's had 25 years of military career, including several military operations in the Balkans and Africa, NATO Response Force, and the EU battle groups. He then shifted to the academia when he specializes in political sciences, international relations, security and defense, global risk analysis, foresight and crisis management. Serge will present the main findings of the ETR 2024 report. He's actually a very frequent guest in Geneva when we launch also other reports by the Institute, the Peace Index and the Terrorism Index, so you can see him more in the future as well. Next, we will hear from Thammy, who's a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's GeoTech Center. Ms. Evans brings more than 20 years of experience in security and justice sector reform, with a focus on defense reform and governance amid climate and resource-related pressures. She has had several senior advisory roles, among others in Geneva Center for Security Sector Governance, so DCAF, our friends and sister organization here, but also in NATO in North Macedonia. And she also served as an officer in the British Army and worked for the UK Ministry of Defence, including on climate security. And she's a very thoughtful and thought-provoking speaker. I really love to have her on my courses because she always sparks a lot of interesting and original thoughts about environment and security and ecological security. Finally, we will hear from Dominique Bourgeon, who has been director of the Food and Agriculture Organization Liaison Office, the United Nations in Geneva, since January 2021, following over 8 years as director of FAO's Emergency and Rehabilitation Division, and now Office of Emergencies and Resilience, and leading the FAO Corporate Strategic Program on Resilience. He has extensive experience in humanitarian development assistance, including through the most recent field assignments as FAO representative in Bangladesh. He also worked in Syria and also in UN headquarters in New York. The event, of course, is running parallel to the UNFCCC Baku COP29. Some of you have been there, some of you are attending probably some online events. I would be really curious to hear from our speakers as well what they think about the state of negotiation, the state of or level of commitments of the different parties of the convention, and what would be your hopes and maybe worries about the final result of the negotiation. We will hear first from Serge, who's going to present to us the report, and then we'll hear from Thammy and Dominique on what they found interesting in the report, but also connecting it to their different contexts in which they are working. So we'll look forward to a rich discussion, no pressure there. And Serge, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Anna. I'm going to use my PowerPoint, which has been prepared for this Ecological Threat Report. I think, as you say, we are amidst COPs, coming out of the COP for biodiversity, and now for COP of climate change, UNFCCC, and heading into a couple of weeks to Riyadh for the COP on desertification also. So we're really at the heart of what is going on, trying to understand the effects of climate change, also the impact of ecological threats. And that's really at the heart of what this report is doing. What we try to do is definitely look at the interplay between the impact of ecological threats on one hand, and on the other hand, also look at the resilience of countries, the social resilience of country to absorb those shocks as such. So first of all, the Institute for Economics and Peace. So we are Australia-based, Sydney-based. I'm heading the office in Brussels. We have offices throughout the world. And what we do is measuring, quantifying peace, and by doing so, making it actionable and tangible, so that we can really operate and create more peace while doing so. So this report is really looking at 207 countries and territories. But we have the ability to go under the national level. So basically what we are comparing in this report is more than 3,500 local administrative areas. And you will see later on that it is possible for us to really go inside the countries and really see where the impact is the largest and why the impact is concentrating in some part of the countries or in some regions also. So we have 9 regions on it. When we say all those countries, well, it's pretty close to the entire world population. And we score 4 risk domains on a scale from 1 to 5. So we look at food insecurity, water risk, of course, both are linked, the demographic pressure. So these 3 together is offer and demand when it comes to those resources. And we also look at the impact of several natural events or natural disasters and see how they affect potentially conflict, but also development in large parts of the world. So let's start with the key findings. So this is a map, and you find those maps for all our indexes on our website, visionofhumanity.org. It gives you already a color code, so you can already imagine, and we look at the color code and you can clearly see at Sub-Saharan Africa, it's really the region we need to talk about in this Ecological Threat Report in today's presentation also. But on our website, you can also click on each of the countries, which gives you direct access to the data. It's a really interactive map, really nice to use. So the main findings, of course, and we have been producing this for 5 years now, and every year we can say the same. Without concerted action, this is going to get worse every year, and the solution will be more expensive. We can clearly see this very strong correlation between the impact of ecological threats and levels of violence and level of conflict throughout the world. The ecological event is either a source for the conflict or an instrument within the conflict also. What we also see is that today 50 countries are facing high or very high ecological threat. Currently, 1.3 billion people live in those countries, and by 2050, if my maths are good, that's in about 25 to 26 years, more than 2 billion people are going to live in those countries. And really, over the past 5 years, what really impressed me the most is that the demographic pressure is the highest in those parts or in those local administrative areas where the situation is the worst. It's really almost like one out of X there, that we see that where it's really going wrong, this is where the demographic pressure is the highest also. We have identified 27 hotspot countries, so those are countries most impacted, least resilient. 19 of those countries are in Sub-Saharan Africa, 4 in the MENA region, and 4 more in other regions also. And of course, we see this very strong correlation between I would say the impact, the lack of resilience, and the potential for conflict. So if we continue, when we look at the major findings, we can clearly see that for food insecurity, we're talking about 1.7 billion people by 2050. And of course, this number goes up when it comes to water risk. And as I said before, the demographic pressure is going to concentrate in sub-Saharan Africa. So when you look at it globally, you see that this is the region which is going to see an increase of their population by almost 70%, while access to resources like food and water is already problematic today. So we already have a problem today, which is only going to increase if nothing happens, nothing is taken care of over the coming 25 years. So you will see later in this report also that I'm going to talk about how to better use water for irrigation, how to better also use fertilizers, how to increase the yields for the agriculture in this part of the world also. What we also see is that in the countries really impacted by ecological threats, but with low levels of resilience, the impact of natural disasters is really a factor 7. So many more people will be affected by it, maybe more people will be injured and die, be displaced, and we have difficulties to come back to their countries of origin. This is a graph showing you the ETR score per region. So you can clearly see there that Sub-Saharan Africa is, of course, most impacted, followed by South Asia and then all the other regions of the world. I think it's also very interesting to see, and I think it's almost logic or straightforward to understand that Europe, as you can see there, is least impacted, most resilient, or at least one of those regions where the impact is still quite low and manageable, but the level of resilience is super high. I personally think, so that's not an IEP point of view, but I personally think that this also comes with a form of responsibility and solidarity for the rest of the world. And I think this should be really central in policies and legislation which is developed, that there's no way we will be able to continue to be peaceful in Europe, and there's no way we will continue be able to continue to be, super resilient if the surrounding regions are not at peace and are not able to deal with the ecological impact that we are talking about today. When we look at the country hotspots, so those 27 countries, so we can clearly see, as I said before, higher forms of impact, but also low forms of resilience. The resilience is measured by our positive peace index, or at least our concept of positive peace, which is basically our measurement of resilience. As said, Sub-Saharan Africa most impacted also there, and of course we can clearly see that in this region we see high levels of food insecurity, water stress, and of course the population growth that I spoke about before. I think there's one thing we need to understand here, is that some of those countries might not be super impacted at the moment. We can see that the ecological threats are maybe not as high as it would be in another part of the world or in other countries, but it's really the level of resilience which is driving them, putting them really close to societal implosion or social implosion. So we might see countries basically disintegrate or disappear because of this ecological pressure, ecological threat pressure, but also the lack of resiliency. And I think we need to understand there that if we only focus on impact, as also a definition of who should receive financial climate aid, we might target the wrong countries if we do not take the resiliency into account also. And we might support some countries while others are disintegrated and disappearing. And that's another, of course, I would say more visual approach to the impact. You can clearly see the sub-Saharan African region and basically this entire Sahel belt that you can see there. So those are the countries. So those are the 27 hotspot countries. And I would say, if you go through this list, you can also basically identify that those countries will also be impacted quite heavily by terrorism. So this is a type of countries you will find back on top of other impact index, the global terrorism index. But definitely also for most of those countries, you will find them back in the lower third of all these indexes also. So if we continue, if we really focus now on the ecological threats, what we see there, for food insecurity, for example, are 26 countries facing high or very high overall levels of food insecurity. So most of those countries are again in sub-Saharan Africa. And what we see there is that in those countries, the problem is linked to water, the production of food. So that's one part. And I will talk about this later, showing you that, instead of having one endangered harvest a year, because then you need to, it's really the rainy season. This is when you can start having something growing, things like this. What you could do is basically become better at capturing water, managing water, distributing water, and really create irrigation over a long period of time, and maybe starting creating 2, 3, maybe 4 harvests a year, and go further than just like, make sure that you have food for yourself or for your community, and really start to producing food and start kind of a business around it. So starting something much more systemic than just, being able to survive as a community, as a population also. So I think we need to be aware that when we look at food insecurity, it's closely linked to water security, and water is really not a problem as such in Africa, as you will see normally in one of the coming slides. Another issue is really looking at the global food prices. So of course, driven by some form of conflict, but not caused by conflict. So the increase of food prices were already there before some of the crises of the past years, being the global financial crisis, or even maybe COVID-19, or the war between Russia and Ukraine. We can clearly see that those only accelerate, but are not the cause of increasing food prices also there. So that's something we need to understand. But definitely food prices are today much higher, and of course fertilizers also much higher than what it was about 15 to 20 years ago also. When we look at the water risk, of course linked with food, I already said that. And of course, a lack of water is leading to a lack of food. It's very logical, right? I don't need to really explain it. So 2 billion people today, problems about safe drinking water. 3.6 billion people today lack access to safe sanitation. Of course, this figure is going to grow with the demographic pressure also. But I think we need to really understand what it means, 2 billion people and 3.6 billion people compared to the 8 billion people living on the face of the earth, as we see today. And the water risk is not strongly correlated with the water resource. So we see, for example, in Sub-Saharan Africa, that the amount of water over a year period is the same than it was before, but it's more erratic now. So instead of having this big major rain season, you will have rainfall really spread over the year and really erratic. So this problem of water capture, water management, water distribution is more acute today than it was in the past. And I will show you later on that there are like easy low-tech solutions to maybe take care of this, and also maybe a global investment that will allow those populations to, of course, become better at water management and water distribution, and also become better at producing agricultural products as such. So if we continue about the natural disasters, I think I already spoke quite a lot about this, trying to explain that, the natural disasters are not really super impacting a lot of countries. So only about 12 countries really see a high to very high impact of those natural disasters. It's because we see also that, a lot of those countries still have a high levels of resilience to take care of that, and we see that this is spread over the years. So we see peaks, but definitely you can really take care of that. What we also see there is that this level of resilience is going to, as I said before, increase the number of casualties, increase the number of impact persons, and also the number of people displaced, and the period of time that you need to come back into your area of origin. Now, if you look at the demographic pressure, so clearly there. We look at coming close to 10 billion people by 2050, coming from 8.2 at the moment. So in the next 25 years, plus 25%. And as I said before, it's for some regions, it's already problematic today, and it's only going to become worse if nothing is really done about this. We also see that the majority of people, or the majority of this growth is going to happen in the least peaceful countries, so the countries most affected, as I said before. Concentration of the growth in Africa, on the African continent, but definitely in Sub-Saharan Africa also. We have the youth bulge, which is going to be created, so definitely something we need to take care of, while in other regions, we can clearly see that the demographic figures are basically shrinking, or at least the population is shrinking and aging also. So if we look at conflicts and ecological threats, I think For the past 5 years, for the 5 editions of the ETR, we have clearly seen this correlation there. And we also see that climate change alone does not really cause violent conflict, but it's a threat amplifier, threat multiplier also. We see that natural disasters or the ecological impact is either a source of violence, source of conflict, but most of the time it's just an instrument within an existing conflict or to start a new conflict as such also. And we see that this is mostly used in low-level conflicts, which then can become, more regional and more intense and create more, basically also maybe regionalized and eventually globalized and create many more casualties and really last for much longer as a conflict as such. And we really see that ecological degradation is a potential conflict, but that conflict is also enhancing the impact of ecological degradation. I think it's really important to see which zones are impacted. And that's something that we started to discover as we started to move below the national level, really at this level of those local administrative units. You can clearly see there, I would call them friction zones. And here it's called the transition zone and the number of conflict index. So you can clearly see that mostly it's along borders, along transition zones, or along, I would say, non-geographical borders, like ethnical borders or community borders. At those friction zones, this is where you're going to see that the number of conflict deaths, but also that the impact of those ecological threats are at the highest also. Oh, if you can do the next one, please. Okay, so another representation when we would only look at Burkina Faso and Mali. And of course, what you could do there is add some layers, look at different strategic factors influencing peace and security. And you would see that those red dots will only become more and more intense. And it's only in very specific geolocations that you will see an interaction of a wide variety of strategic factors influencing peace and security. If you would add to this, for example, and map access to resources, access to natural resources, you will start to see that those dots and those regions are becoming more and more intense on the map also. So clearly there, different forms of friction zone, different forms of borders and transition zones also. And of course, when you look at the conflicts that's in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, so the 3 countries most impacted also by terrorism and other forms of violence, you can clearly see this spark over the past 5 to 7 years. What is also really important is to look at this map and look at the potential for, or the risk for relapse in existing or former conflicts. When I say relapse, basically a conflict which is now not active, which can become active again, or, as I said before, a country, low intensity conflict, which can gain into intensity and start to become maybe more of a major conflict than it is at the moment there also. So there is potential for that, as you can see in Sub-Saharan Africa also. So if we look at food security in Sub-Saharan Africa, and I guess that's one of my last chapters for today. I also spoke about what is possible there. So what we can clearly see, and of course the figures are on the slide, is this capacity to become better at organizing food production and at organizing and managing, I would say, water distributions. And you can see those figures. So we see that in Sub-Saharan Africa today, the percentage of the use of irrigation is much lower than in the rest of the world. The yield per square meter or the yield per hectare is also much lower than in the rest of the world. So what we need to do is make sure that we find solutions to increase the potential of irrigation, increase the yield per hectare, and by basically managing better the water resource, by starting using the right fertilizers. And I think and continue to do these kind of things. And then when we see that, you will see that, as I said before, this conceptual, I would say, this systemic approach to stability and higher resilience in those communities will really kick in, and we'll be able to maybe, I would say, start to create more peace or more stability in those communities also. So definitely there, low level, low key, low tech, low finance solutions, local solutions with good solutions need to be supported by doing so. And that's basically looking at a map on Africa, the potential for, I would say, sand dam implementation. Sand dam is something which is going to cost between $50,000 and $100,000, which is quite low as an investment in this part of the world, but it will last for about 50 years, 50 to 100 years also, and is able to really capture water, filter water, keep water, and which can then redistribute it within either the community, but also in irrigation on the fields that the community is really working on. So you can see that there's a huge potential for that. That's really low-key, low investment, low-tech, good solution to start, maybe not at national level, but at local level to start managing the water resource. I think for 15, 20 years now, I've been aware of, for example, a country like Zambia, which is one of the richest countries in terms of water, well, still people are facing water risk and water stress in this country. So it's really a problem of capture and management. This is another evolution where you clearly see where the yield is at the moment, the current production. And then if you just add a little layer per little layer per little layer, when you look at, well, let's start irrigating in a better way, let's start to use the right fertilizer, you can see that very quickly you can have a very strong increase in the production and the availability of agricultural products in this part of the world also. Well, that was the end of my presentation. I need to apologize for, as every year, bringing not such a good news, but I'm used to it because that's what I do for the other indexes also, unfortunately. But that's what we do at the Institute. We just try to, bring you the kind of a snapshot of the reality when it comes to peace, when it comes to the impact of terrorism, or as I'm doing today, the impact of those ecological threats and the lack of resilience to basically deal with it. And thank you again to GCSP for being such a wonderful partner and allowing us to have those presentations every time.
Thank you so much, Serge. And thank you so much as well, because, on one hand, you are presenting the results of the report that are quite bleak. But on the other hand, what I really liked about this report this year is about talking about the solutions, the possible solutions that are not that expensive, that actually scaling them up maybe would be a good idea for us to kind of start working on addressing these ecological threats. So this was really a fantastic job, and kind of seeing the evolution of the report as well from 5 years ago until now. It's really a promising endeavor, and as well promising in terms of how do you connect to people who actually can have impact on policies in different countries, in different regions. So thank you so much. With this, I will give the floor to Thammy, please.
Great, thank you very much. And Serge, that was a really a very succinct run through the entire report. And I have to say, looking at that report compared to the previous ones, this one definitely is much more solutions oriented, I felt. To the extent that I think the report puts forward concrete and costed solutions that we can go forward with. So whilst it can feel, negative as a report, I did feel this one, as we talk a lot about climate finance, and of course, COP29 is very much about climate finance this year. This report really does shine a light on where climate finance needs to concentrate in order to have some really amazing effects. Some of the data in there I thought was really so useful. Things like, the United Arab Emirates has 16 meters cubed of water per person, which is very, very little. Whereas, Iceland has something like almost 500,000 meters cubed per person. Yet, water insecurity is not really an issue in the UAE because they have very good governance and they have a system that manages, the water that they have and how they distribute that. And so it demonstrates to us that whilst climate finance, needs to focus on certain areas, the limiting factor for climate finance is going to be governance and resilience. It's like any business anywhere around the world. They are very concerned about investing in a place that is not going to give not just returns on their investment, but know that it's going to be safe and it's going to be worthwhile and it's going to have traction. So that for me is actually more the concern than the insecurity, the water insecurity and the food insecurity per se. And that then takes us back round to the security sector, and how do we work with those countries to make sure that we can improve that governance and that resilience. And there is actually a lot of, I think, succor that we can take. We can look back in history to see where areas actually have been very fertile in the past and have done very well. But as a result of human intervention, we've messed a lot of these places up. I mean, the Middle East used to be the Fertile Crescent. I mean, it's it might have been several thousand years ago, 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, but it's, ecologically speaking, it's not that far away. The same with the lowest plateau in China. And again, we've seen 6,000 years ago, that was a very fertile place. As a result of the way in which it was farmed, that has become essentially a desert. But we also see now how the World Bank and others, China as a country itself, have put the kind of infrastructure in place in parts of the lowest plateau that they have been able to regenerate quite a lot of that land. So it can be done, and we need to concentrate on those areas. Now, I know we said we'd talk a little bit about the kind of the geopolitics of what's going on around the world today, and COP29 in particular, and how quite a few countries seem to be backtracking, or could be more than likely, we fear, will be backtracking on climate pledges in the very near future, and some are doing so already. That is a worrying phenomenon. However, I will point out that what we are also seeing globally is a shift from the centrality of party politics to a move towards a participatory democracy. And I think this is a really important piece for us all to catch on to. Once upon a time, the big parties, in politics were the real movers and shakers in what happened in the country. And we are seeing now that citizens themselves are finding other ways to get after these things. So again, when we go back to the kind of solutions that you're talking about and climate finance, how much does that really need to depend on the political will of countries? I hear this all the time. Oh, there's no political will. You can't get these things done. There's always political will. The question is, where is the political will and how to harness that? So some of these finance initiatives can be done by business, without their needing to be kind of party politics backing of certain types of finance. It helps. Yes, it helps. But if we compare where we were 10 years ago to where we are now, I mean, green business, green capitalism is in a whole different place. If we look at where solar technology, air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, precision irrigation, fertilization, fertilizer use, and the use of AI to manage some of these areas, we are streets ahead of where we were 10 years ago. So I think there are a number of tech solutions that can be brought to bear on what is happening right now. And they can act as a bridge, I think, between where party politics doesn't want to get involved in, climate change or climate solutions for whatever reason, but business does. And at the end of the day, business, and it's always useful to track the insurance policymakers, I find, as to where they're prepared to put money or not put money. Is a useful way to look at that. But the last piece really is of course, governance. And participatory democracy requires means for people to get involved in those solutions. I think that's where, a number of countries, it's more difficult than other countries, and we need to look at how to enhance that. And of course, that includes indigenous populations. It includes women in particular, who often are at the coalface, so to speak, at the field of where these solutions can be found, and they have the knowledge in order to do that. So I'll leave that there for now. I'm sure we'll have questions later, but those are some of my observations on the report, which I thought was really excellent. I recommend it to everybody. and I shall definitely be passing it around climate finance groups and discussions about the economy in the world in all of my work. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Thammy. And while you were speaking, I was just thinking about this recent vote in Switzerland where we said no to a biodiversity proposition, coming from the COP on biodiversity last year, right? 30 by 30 for the protection of increased protection of biodiversity in Switzerland. So there is also a question of how we communicate. What narratives are we creating for people to actually understand? This is where this report actually comes very handy, because you understand the threats and you understand the risks, and Switzerland is not going to be of course it has a very high level of resilience, but at the same time it can be hit by something that we don't expect. I come from Poland, and in Poland we are experiencing very high level of drought that we are not talking about, so it's going to be increasingly important for us to communicate.
We absolutely need to move towards regenerative economics. A circular economy, regenerative economics, and this report really provides some of the solutions towards that. And that will lead towards regenerative security. As we know, without security there is no development. Without development there is no security. These things do feed on each other. A number of sectors can contribute to that.
Yeah, thank you so much. Dominique, we come to you with the perspective from FAO, food security, but not only, because you've been also involved in management of crises and, in your context, so please.
Thank you very much, and we are delighted to have been invited to participate in this event on the environment threat report, and the way I would say the reports present the interaction between looks at ecological threats and present the interaction between climate change, water scarcity, as well as food security, and the look it has at other stressors, such as governance and demographic pressures, definitely speaks to a number of areas of work of FAO. So we are delighted to have the opportunity to engage on this and to perhaps build bridges. Perhaps on the global picture, I think the global food security picture is unfortunately not good. You refer to the expected number of people who are going to experience food insecurity in 2050. I mean, as we speak, there is about 730 million people who are undernourished. There is 2.8 billion people who do not have access to healthy diets. There is 2.4 billion people who indeed have some form of food insecurity. So it is very concerning. In the meantime, and this comes to some of the threats that you refer to in the report, we know that the agri-food system is contributing to about 30% of greenhouse gas emission, that it represents about 72% of freshwater withdrawals, that it has huge impact on biodiversity, on soil, etc. So I think there is now this consensus on the need to transform the agri-food system, and I think it's at the very core of what an organization like FAO is trying to do to support countries in reaching their sustainable development goals by indeed working on the transformation of these food systems. Now, coming perhaps more specifically on the linkages which you are referring to in the report, I mean, another important piece of work that we have been doing essentially since the World Humanitarian Summit back in 2016 in Istanbul was to produce a report that is called the Global Report on Food Crisis. And there, the last edition of that report showed that about 280 million people were in acute food insecurity, the type of food insecurity that can lead. I mean, as we speak, there are famine conditions in some countries, and especially in Sudan, occurring. And definitely what we see is that, of course, food insecurity is clearly a consequence of conflict. And this is what also the countries have very much acknowledged in the context of the UN Security Council Resolution 2417 on the link between conflict and hunger, which is still informing a lot of political discussions on that. But then, as rightly said in the report, food insecurity is also a driver of conflict, and clearly we see that the number of extreme weather events is increasing a lot, drought, floods, that sort of thing, and clearly this is generating tension over scarcity of resources. This is fueling displacement and can indeed drive conflict. And often what is also interesting to see is the interaction between the two. For example, if you look at a country like Somalia has been in a conflict situation for the last many years, and so the level of vulnerability of the people is extremely high, and so a small and unfortunately these are not small climate shocks that are coming, but repeated shocks are coming on a very high level of vulnerability, and then push people off the cliff, and then we go into a very acute food insecurity. What we are trying to say is that indeed agri-food system offer, I would say, a critical entry point to work on these interrelated matters, and this is one of the proposals that FAO has been doing at last year COP, also proposing a roadmap for the transformation of agri-food system while remaining within the 1.5 degree target. What I found also very interesting in the report is the fact that at local conflict there are many. At local level, there is many conflict that start around access to natural resources, and you make a very good case for the situation of pastoralists and the fact that there is a significant increase in the number of agro-pastorally driven conflicts, and especially in the Sahel, but also I believe in the Horn of Africa, etc. And this speaks very much to studies and the work that we have been doing in FAO, where we see that as a result of conflict, as a result of climate, often as a result of the two, we see that migration routes, transhumance routes, as we call them, are being disrupted. Therefore, more and more, I would say, risk of pastoralism going into local farmers area, therefore the risk of conflict. What I like in the report is when you are saying that local governance mechanisms are often very good solutions, are often working very well to solve this risk of local level conflict. Yes, I would say yes. Our experience is that yet they need to be supported. And whatever we can do to support those local governance mechanisms is indeed very important. There are plenty of examples, like the C1 project of IGAD in the Horn of Africa, or a lot of work that has been done in the context of the peace building fund in the Sahel, where we have been working at early warning. So when we see risk of potential conflict, the local governance mechanism have to come into play. They can be supported with resources, non-traditional movement. How can we have points where they can stop with their livestock, get some water, feed, etc. Very important to support those local level mechanisms. Very important. The report also, I would say, rightly stresses that the transformation of this agri-food system not only lead to more productive but more resilient food system. And when we look at the number, another report that FAO is working is a report on the impact of disasters on the agri-food system, and we see that over 30 years, 3.8 trillion were lost lost due to in crops and livestock, which is an average of 123 billion per year of indeed loss, and therefore the need really to act, to engage, I would say, at all level. And this is what we do, working from, I would say, the grassroots level up to, promoting a concrete solution at grassroots level, but also working in these big fora, such as the 3 COPs, but also others, and also trying to support our members in the formulation and implementation of national adaptation plans, and how can we enable them to access also GCF and GEF resources, for example. Now, I think lastly, what I want to say on the report is that it's also indeed providing a lot of concrete solutions. And in that, I would say that, for example, when you look at the roadmap, the 1.5 degree roadmap I was referring to in FAO, is that I would really encourage you. I see it as a very complementary type of document, because it's actually putting together in a coherent way the work of FAO, the work that FAO has been doing for many years, to indeed this time focus on really addressing the climate challenge within this 1.5 degree target, promoting a whole lot of concrete solutions from the grassroots to the global level. You are referring to, for example, better use of fertilizer. Yes, and it was even something that we proposed immediately in the aftermath of the beginning of the war in Ukraine, where there was a scarcity of fertilizer, and where we have been supporting countries in soil mapping to understand really what are the needs, instead of, I would say, using massively fertilizer. Storage is also a big challenge. I mean, 30% of the food produced is either lost or wasted. In the last part, there is a huge part for storage, and then of course all the work that is being done again at all level on how can we improve water efficiency and use the potential of the irrigation potential, as you are calling it, of some region, including the sub-Saharan Africa. So a lot there. It's a huge report, plenty of information, but just to say that there are many linkage points with the work we do.
Thank you so much, Dominique. And I wouldn't be head of human security at the GCSP if I didn't mention the 3 strategies of human security that are protection, empowerment, and solidarity, with the latest report in 2022. Which actually is a part of what we're talking about here. Protection, in terms of protecting the populations, having early warning systems so that we can, help them avoid certain risks and loss of life, of course. Empowerment, the whole conversation about local governance and empowering grassroots movements is so important now, and increasingly important, and kind of not counting only on the, high-level leaders and this leadership is actually lacking right now. So having these people working on the local solutions is very important, and kind of for us the task would be maybe to connect this gap between this local and national, or even beyond regional or global. And finally, the solidarity strategy, which is really about us realizing, and this is why I like the name ecological, because it puts human societies within the nature. We are part of nature, we are not apart from it. So I know that it sounds very philosophical, but at the same time, I don't think we think about it enough, because we are basically, sowing the branch on which we are sitting and not really stopping it. So with this, I would like you to think about your questions, but I will ask my question first as a privilege of the moderator. I just wanted to ask kind of each one of you precisely on what you think about the progress, or what are your hopes and fears about what's happening now in Baku. And we'll start maybe the other way around from Dominique. You have a big group there, so...
Yeah, indeed. We have... FAO is very much present there. I mean, as a matter of fact, what we see is that the topic of agriculture food security has gained momentum over the last couple of years, and especially in the context, for example, of the Sharm el-Sheikh adaptation agenda. There's been a lot of work that is being done. FAO is, of course, also supporting global frameworks such as for example, the Warsaw International Mechanism and the Santiago Network. Now we are one of the OBME really supporting this process. We are also a signatory of the COP28 Declaration on Climate Relief, Recovery and Peace, which is indeed very important. But what remains really a concern, and in this COP being called by many the financing COP, is the level of finance that is indeed going to the food system. We consider that there is $29 billion going to the food systems, which is about 23% of the global of the total climate development funding. The estimate is that, and this was something that was tabled in that conference, is that we would need about 1 trillion per year until 2030 if we would be able to reach the net zero target. So the technical solutions are there. I mean, the set of actions that need to be put into practice is there. We are working with the countries to make sure, of course, there is no blueprint. It varies a lot from one country to another. This is why these snaps are indeed very important. We are working with the country to put them, to develop the plans, but then the financing remains indeed a key point, and this is very much part of the advocacy of what FAO is doing there. Our Director General was there repeatedly advocating in Baku. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dominique. Thammy.
Yes, so Baku, COP29. Yes, I mean, obviously, as the finance COP, it is disconcerting when, the funding that we know that has been costed, that needs to be done, does not appear at the COP. But of course, that said, as I mentioned before, that it does provide a focal point for organisations to, in a way, learn about these things. I think in many ways, of course, we've had these for a long time, but every time there's a new report that comes out, right? Every time that there is, more advocacy done at these events, this helps organisations later, after the COP, to focus on these specific places. So it's a long way to go, but they are. It's good to have that focus. I think what's more disconcerting in a way is, as I mentioned before, is the way in which the wind has been taken a bit out of the sails of this COP because of geopolitical issues going on elsewhere around the world, and that is where, as we mentioned before, I think then trying to find other ways to generate that kind of finance is really important. But the argument for that is still not well understood, and that's something that we really need to be getting after. We need to be working on upstream capacity building. We need to be working on conflict prevention. We need to understand security, as you have mentioned, Anna, as not just state-centric security, but that is underpinned by security, and that is absolutely underpinned by ecological security. Without it, we can last for, what do they say, 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food. These are going to cause big shifts if people don't have access to that water and that food. But we can prevent that. We have the solutions, right? We've just said the solutions are out there. The money is out there. I get very annoyed when countries say, "Oh, it's going to be very expensive to do this." It's like, right, listen, every time you spend money, somebody is earning that money. Somebody has a job, okay? The question is, who has the job, right? So these are the kind of issues we need to tackle. Conflict prevention, classically, because we can't measure something that didn't happen, we tend to think, therefore, it's difficult to attract finance in that direction. And again, in this day and age, there are absolutely ways to track how investment prevents conflict further down the line. There are reasons why, for instance, we do vaccinations. You know, if I get vaccinated, and there are lots of anti-vaxxers out there, if I get vaccinated, I am not going to get ill for whatever I'm vaccinated for. How on earth do I know that it worked? I mean, we know that it worked because we've had control groups and we have tests that put these things in place. So going back to COP29, the finance is still lacking. We need to find ways to advocate for why that finance is going to prevent conflict and how we can measure that. And again, there are many ways to do that in this day and age. Again, artificial intelligence, AI, tech is absolutely able to help us in that space, and that's what we need to concentrate on moving forward.
Thank you so much. Serge.
The nice part of coming last is that you can basically condense on the first two, as I said before. I think we are in a situation now where, I mean, when I look at the other reports of the Institute for Economics and Peace, we see that we are facing now the lowest levels of peacefulness, the highest number of conflicts throughout the world, as we did before. So we live in a situation in which I think national security is now much more important than human security, and maximization of your interest, your power, because power is now the common denominator of international relations. So that's the environment in which we live. And at the end of the day, for each government, there's only one budget, right? So you need to set your priorities. And if your priority is now national power and development of that, it's almost obvious that climate aid, or at least being aware of what's going on, or investment in development, or even investment in diplomacy, is now sacrificed for the new investment in defense that we have also seen as a trend, or a break of trend in the global peace index. So every dollar which is going to defense today, for whatever reason, is a dollar or a pound or a euro that is not going towards these very important things about human security. We're not investing in an efficient development. We're investing too much in humanitarian aid because development is not efficient. And we're definitely not investing enough in absorbing the impact of climate change. So I think I would like to reinforce what has been said before. Solutions are there, are in the report, in what specialists are putting to the table also. The solutions are there, cost to the solution, and you can take that and turn it every direction you want. The cost of inaction is always going to be bigger than the cost of action. Mm-hmm. And when you compare the cost of action to the cost of violence, conflict, war, investment in defense, or whatever, which is lost money, and you lose this money more than one time. When you start comparing this, you need to understand where you need to put your money, but that's at the end of the day, it's a political decision, right? Because it's of states and government or their representatives at those COPs who are making the decisions. So I think that's what we need to understand, that we live in a world where human security is not put first anymore, but it's national security. And when you look at the budgets, you need to put your priorities in today. The priority is not maybe any more development or prevention of as you said, protection, empowerment, and solidarity toward the human being. So that maybe we need to reshift towards putting the human being central again, and investing on money in something that is really going to build a better world for each of us.
Music to my ears, but but there is a reality that is it's there, and when you read all the CPRI reports in the past, on the defense spending, it's growing. Really fast, and there are choices that are being made, in high places that actually don't choose human security as a main priority.
But I think we can have both.
Yes. No, me too. Yes.
I think we can have both. So in defence, and especially with some of those we have in the audience here, how defence spends that money is really important. where defence spends that money is really important. I talked about, upstream capacity building and conflict prevention. At the moment, obviously, Europe is putting a lot of money into defence. But again, where it puts that money is important. If it puts that money into infrastructure, particularly into, for instance, roads, they want to put that money into roads because it may need to hold a certain weight of tanks, okay? Personally, I'd be going for electric tanks, but anyway, that's a whole other conversation. But that kind of infrastructure helps to build up the resilience, in those countries for the storms and the floods that we are seeing coming, in those areas. Similarly, when working with partner countries in Africa, in Haiti, in South America, in some of these very, the Middle East, these high countries that you have mentioned in the report are hotspots, how that money gets invested so that there is, greater independence of those countries, and that if, heaven forbid, militaries need to, for whatever reason, move into those countries, they are doing so in a way that is much more sustainable. That is not drawing on the water resources of those countries, that is not, drawing on the food resources of those countries, or bringing it in from outside, in a way that then creates perverse, incentives in those countries, as we've seen in Afghanistan. Wheat brought in, that collapsed the wheat economy, and then brought in poppy, production. So there's clever ways in which defence could actually contribute, and this is what I talk about with regards to regenerative security. And more countries are doing that. NATO, is considering that. And again, that's where we need to find more solutions to move things in that direction.
And again, if I may, the local level in that context being very important.
Yeah.
I mean, we see so many of these conflicts starting over access to something, to range, to water, to pasture. And our experience is that, and you wouldn't believe that, but working on technical issues, working on, for example, we have a fantastic experience working in Abyei. Abyei is this area between the disputed area in the middle of Sudan, South Sudan, and they are bringing together two communities that were fighting for a very long period, and facilitating dialogue over access to pasture, providing animal health support, has led to local peace solutions that have then gone into global solutions for peaceful coexistence between those communities. And the same applies to water associations. Perhaps another example, we've been working in Yemen, where we have been empowering existing women group, providing support to these women group because they had a leadership over access to water in some areas. You empower them and you go into lasting local solutions. So I think it's a complementarity of all these levels. But one of the challenges we are facing for many of these things, many of the work we are talking about, because you were referring to humanitarian. I mean, we've been talking for a very long period of this famous humanitarian development peace nexus. We see that where we implement it, where we have resources over a certain period of time, it shows results. It shows results. And the resilience of people increases. And those people, for example, again, Somalia or Eastern DRC, those people would resist more coming to additional shocks. Because we have been working, and it's not about FAO working alone. It's a multi-sectoral effort because for example, improving food security, but also improving access to education, to primary health care, etc. We see that when we do that, when we work with actors like, for example, here in this building, I think Interpeace and others, trying to promote local level solution, this work. And but the challenge we have is that the funding, again, is very difficult to sustain funding for that sort of activities over the long term. And also the point is, there are many, I would say, pilot projects. But to say, okay, in a given area, we are going to massively invest for that sort of activity over a sustained period of time is sometimes challenging. So we need to walk the talk.
Thank you so much. And when I'm thinking, listening to you, after Thammy's reaction, at the GCSP, what we do is talk about comprehensive security. So it's not an either/or question. Again, it's a question of and. So it's human security, it's state security, it's regenerative security, it's ecological security, and many other, and connecting the dots between all of these elements. So thank you so much. It was really, really spot on. Okay, with this, I wanted to open the floor for any comments, any questions you might have. Yes, please.
Yes, hello, I'm Jean-Pierre Raymond, the head of 2050 Today's Geneva Climate Action Forum. I have three short questions for you. The first one is, if you compare when you have started this report and 5 years later, what are the striking differences? The second is you provide a level starting with 0 to 5. Till which point is it manageable? 2, is it manageable? 3, 4? When we start to go for a real disaster? And the last question, have you been able to measure how much funds have been diverted from, let's say, regenerative action for climate, for development, for human security to hard defense? Is it possible to have some figures in the last 2 years, since we have major conflicts in the Middle East or in Ukraine, Russia?
On your first question, I think when we look both at ecological impact and resilience, those are two very systemic movements, or I would say systems that we are witnessing, and we all know that systems do not evolve that fast. So we can see the little nudges, we can see the little differences, but basically the report over 5 years, when you look to the impact and resilience, has not really moved a lot. So that's why in each of the reports we try to have a special focus, like we had this year, maybe more on the food and agriculture, and also providing those solutions. So that's the first approach. The second approach, when we go 1 to 5, this is purely a statistical approach to make sure that we can build the index. What we see, of course, is the combination of different threats. So we, of course, have the 4 domains. We see countries only impacted by 1 or 2. Then we see, of course, countries where basically facing 4, or there is water stress, food insecurity, a large demographic pressure or evolution, and also an always larger impact also of natural disasters. So that's what we look at. And I think what's important in the report is really look at the interplay between that and the levels of resilience. And I think 2 reports ago we had a special box about 2 pages where we compared Haiti and Japan basically facing the same type of impact. I don't need to explain to you that the answer to that is completely different also. When it comes to funding, I think what we have seen is definitely a change in trend over basically a decade. We have seen that more than 100, that's on the Global Peace Index, we have seen that more than 100 countries, but 104, 105 countries decreased their investment into the military. And about 2 to 3 years ago, which is almost equivalent in line with this change from a more liberal approach to international relations into a more, I would say, realist approach, and even offensivist approach to international relations, we have clearly seen that those countries, more than 100 countries, started to invest again into defense and more into defense. And I'm absolutely with you that we can do both. What stresses me more is to see, as you have said, how is this money invested? And when you look at the definition of power, at least the one that I'm using, what is really central in there is what is your strategy and what is your political will to implement this strategy. When I look at Europe or the EU, for example, today, when it comes to a security strategy, I'm still looking for it, right? And so I see investment growing by the billions, by a double-digit % in defense budgets. In what? To achieve which goals? To take care of which threats? That's what I'm missing. And so basically, when you look at, so we don't have those figures, we just have the figures of increased defense budget, increased investment in militarization. And we collaborate together with this ecological cell at NATO headquarters, who basically, with our data, also try to identify potential future conflict zones in which they might intervene. In those zones, you will need to intervene in a different way with a different type of equipment, soldier and training that you intervene in other parts of the world. And as you have said, once you're there, you don't want to increase their footprint by doing so. One of the examples that NATO has been working on is, for example, looking at Iraq and the number of days where the temperature was above 35 degrees. So basically, as a soldier, with all your equipment, you cannot work at 100% level of your capabilities anymore. You have seen that this number of super heat days is increasing, I would say, almost exponentially, where in the 2000s, you could still have a normal operation in Iraq. Today, you need to come in with a complete new approach to it. But to come back to the point, when you look at our foreign policy, for example, or international relations, it's really based on this triangle between diplomacy, defense, and development, all reinforcing each other. We know that in Europe, for example, this triangle is led by the diplomacy, supported by defense and development. In the US, it's defense supported by diplomacy and aid. Well, there's one budget for that. So if we see that there is a higher investment on defense, somebody has to pay for that. And we see now over the past 5 to 6 years that for development, and you spoke about Interpeace, when you look at the main founders of Interpeace, you see, for example, that Sweden has cut its development budget by 50%. Same thing for the Germans, 2/3 for the Netherlands. So the only leg left on the Interpeace chair at the moment is the Swiss funding leg, right? So we see a disinvestment in development. We clearly see that diplomacy is maybe not the first tool to address international relations, and we see an increased investment into the military. And I'm absolutely with you. We can do massive things with this budget, but we need to know what we need to do and where we want to invest it, and invest it in a proper way. What I'm seeing at the moment is not really what you spoke about. I see money going into many different things, and not only in Europe, it's worldwide also. So we speak about more than 100 countries reinvesting into defense, and not always to preserve peace and to assure human development for sure.
Anything to add on this? I know these were questions for Thammy.
I mean, it's, I think we're all agreeing vehemently, right? But that's the point, is that we are getting to that level of granularity now. NATO has been a big advocate, and a number of countries have been a big advocate on human security in operations. Now, it's one thing to have a nice glossy joint service publication, it's another thing to actually do it. And again, to reap the benefits from that. Strategy, ends, means and ways. There's lots of busyness going around, and it appears as if people are doing things. But where is the unity, around the ends of what they're trying to achieve? Where's the follow through for that? Where's the cohesion around, what they're trying to do? And to do it in a way that also is long-term and looks to the long-term, because these are long-term issues. It's too easy to get taken by the near and what we'd call the close battle. When in actual fact, if we do not keep our eye on the ball of what is going on elsewhere, there are adversaries around the world who are absolutely taking advantage of that. And they don't have to do it either with a defence budget. They can do it through disinformation. They can do it through infiltration of, groups in those countries. They can undermine it in different ways. There's a level of granularity that we need to get to, in order to bring these things together, because there is only one planet. There is only Planet A, and we have. I know I talked a little bit flippantly about the fact that there is money out there, but as you said, it's where it gets channeled and how it gets channeled that is critical, right now.
Thank you. I have one question coming from online, but I wanted to give the floor to anybody in the room who would like to ask another question or comment on anything you've heard? Yes, please.
So my name is Ian. I'm a graduate of Leadership in International Security course at GCSP. So I have a question to Thammy, and I want to get back to Sub-Saharan Africa. So my question is about the conflict of interest, I guess. So I want to revert to the darker side, and we all know that there are certain stakeholders that are interested in the region being in disarray. Is divide and conquer, like corporations, military groups, Wagner, Russia. So how do you evaluate the level of resistance from this type of stakeholders to achieve the change in region and prosperity? And what would be the best strategies to tackle that resistance? Thank you.
That's a fantastic, great question. Wow. You've got strategy in there. We're going to definitely be getting into values and interests. Sub-Saharan Africa absolutely is, writ large, an area where certain state actors, we can call them hostile state actors, are keen to divide and conquer. What's interesting if you look at the tactics of those countries is that they don't care whether they are supporting, and we're talking here about COP29 and ecological threat. They don't care whether they're supporting for or against. It's not about one side versus. It is about one side versus the other. It's about creating that divide so that these two sides then fight against each other. So, if we look at the kind of disinformation tactics that are used by hostile state actors, that goes into supporting both sides of the line because it's about creating that bigger divide. So this is where we then get back to how do we find solutions against that? From a state actor perspective, we need to be very careful about being instrumentalized in that fight. And this is where we go back to local participation. Again, local people often have that solution. They know what's going on. It's that classic, we might have the watches, but they have the time. And we have to get to that level of granularity in order to understand that. Now, on the strategic side, why isn't there a grand strategy on countering climate change? Okay, we have had grand strategies of this kind of level to rebuild Europe after World War II. That was pretty big and phenomenal. A grand strategy on climate change. Now, arguably, we can't have one because the states can't agree. That said, as I've mentioned, we're moving from a party political state to a participatory democracy state of affairs. Is there a way in which we can harness these kinds of trends to, focus on that middle ground so that we can provide those kinds of solutions? I think there is. Of course, I would think there is. I've got some writing on that I'm working with some other institutes on to try and affect that. But it's the sort of thing that the response in many ways it almost can't be at the state level because the states are being pitted against each other. So it has to be down at a certain level of citizens and local participation in order to move these things on. That's what I would harness.
Thank you. Serge, would you have anything to add?
Yeah, I have a solution. Representing the Institute for Conflicts and Peace, I need to say that the solution would be positive peace, which is our measure of resilience, right? Where you look at a more systemic development of resilience. And it's basically based on those 8 interconnected pillars, of which high levels of good governance is one, but we also have equitable distribution of resources, free flow of correct information, a sound business environment, low levels of corruption, which is the most difficult pillar to address, high levels of human capital, coming back to you, good relationship with your neighbors. It might seem very, very straightforward, but when you look at all those 8 pillars and the interaction, this is how you create basically stronger, more peaceful societies. And when you invest in this, we also see that all your economic indicators go up, your resilience indicators go up, ecological resilience is going up. So basically, the message that we bring at the Institute is to say you can invest in peace and still have an economic return on your investment, and also I would say a resilience feedback or resilience return on your investment. So I know it's, as I said before, it's very, very systemic, but you need to reach those tipping points, which is really at the heart, at the essence of what systemic thinking is. And that's when, when you said investment is not consistent, that's what we're missing. We don't reach those tipping points because we want too much, and that's basically at the heart of development or whatever, or even humanitarian actions. We want to have really these quick impact projects. We want to take a picture because things are going better, and we miss this long-term vision and this long-term investment reaching those tipping points, because this is where you start to receive the exponential return on your investment. So I think we need to be much more consistent in reaching those tipping points and have this consistent investment also.
Well, one of the piece of work we are doing, and I would invite you to look at it, is funding flows.
Yeah.
I mean, looking at, on the food security side, for example, a couple of years ago, we had a look at DRC, because you were referring to DRC, if I heard you well, the eastern part, on Ituri. And what we saw is that, yes, we have large humanitarian funding, but surprisingly, we have also very large development funding going into DRC. The point is that it is geographically focused. So it means that the longer term, very little of the longer term investments are going into the eastern part of the country. So it means that very little is going into, indeed, longer term resilience building, working on good livelihoods for those communities to stay where they are and to thrive, to stay where they are and to thrive. So this is also part of the problem we are facing. What type of funding is going where?
Yeah.
But I think when, coming back to Africa, it's the epicenter of terrorism, of course, concentrating Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. And of course, we had a shift from the epicenter for the Middle East to there. And of course, you spoke about PMCs or Wagner's or others or Chinese or Russian or whatever being effective also in Africa. Also, and if you for this almost vertical trend toward from Africa, starting in basically Libya, going down to Chad, down to DRC also, you can also follow the trail of the lack of positive peace, lack of resilience. So basically, those actors are filling a void, filling the vacuum. So that's what we need to avoid, is create those vacuums to be filled by those people.
And we are absolutely creating those vacuums right now.
Yeah, exactly, 100%.
That's the issue, right?
And linking to the report, an interesting thing that we have found is that, for example, pastoralists in arid and semi-arid areas, they are very important in I would say, being in those areas that would normally be filled by other actors. And so it means that this is a livelihood that needs to be supported, the pastoralist livelihood, so that they are there in these arid and semi-arid areas, and they are very, very careful where they are to maintain the environment, but also to maintain a relative peace.
Yeah.
Thank you. May I, because we have 5 minutes, I still have one question for Serge from online, and we will have to let people go to about their very important business. So from online, we have Rima, who's asking if you could elaborate on the methodology used to identify hotspots and the countries most at risk. Were you able to assess all countries comprehensively, or are there regions where data gaps remain?
So for the second part of the question, yeah, the analysis is comprehensive, so we can really compare regions and countries up to this really more than 3,500 local administrative units. So basically a hotspot country is a country facing high level of ecological threats. So in the different, food scarcity, water scarcity, economic, demographic pressure, and also a variety of different natural disasters, we see that they are facing a high or very high potential impact on one hand, but also then when we also look at countries really close to zero resilience, basically impacted by conflict already, or impacted by all those different factors, in, for instance, peace and security. So it's really a combination of both, where the impact is high and the resilience is low. And when in those 27 countries that are really selected this year, it's where the antagonism is at its highest level, right? So you see really a super high impact, but really super low resilience. We decided to keep it to these 27 countries and to adopt this. But if you would just like adjust a little bit those variables, you could identify, I don't know, 100 hotspot countries which are like moderate to high to very high impact, and really like a zero resilience to a basic resilience. So it's just a way we want to approach it to say, hey, there is a concentration of the problems in this part of the world or in these countries, and it's really taking maximum impact, lowest level of resilience. And when those two come together, those are the 27 countries. And we have been consistent over the years. I think we shifted between 27 to 30 over the 5 ETRs so far.
Thank you. Thammy, would you like to say what you wanted to say just a moment ago?
So I was just going to say that in response to the funding side, of course, is really important. And in response to the question with regards to sub-Saharan Africa, there was a very innovative project that was done a few years ago, I think around 2000, just before 2013, by the Netherlands government with Burundi, which basically made a commitment over 8 years to fund governance, rule of law, to improve the resilience aspect of things, but did it in a way that was very participatory of the local solutions, local community, and had 2-year gateways in which they reassessed the joint objectives in order to move the projects, the different aspects of those projects forward. Unfortunately, anybody who knows Burundi knows that at some point the president decided to have change the constitution, have a third term, and things became extremely difficult to move things forward. But it was a way in which to, again, harness this finance, in order to build resilience in a way that helps to move governance forward. And notably, NATO, in effect, does something very similar with countries that become NATO members. There are goals that are produced together between NATO and the country wanting to come into NATO. And it may take many years before they actually reach, to join NATO. But that process of working together on goals, but a commitment to a final, to an outcome, is what helps to bring that finance together in a way that can be long-lasting.
Thank you so much. So with this, we are arriving at the end of the time allocated for this session. I have 3 things to do. First is to just say that for me it was such a common sense discussion with ideas that are just a non-brainer for anybody who works on these issues and working on the nexus between the environment and security, and also security writ large, talking about the allocation of finance, talking about the prevention, talking about also the long-term approaches to, the policy that we are putting into place. And, I'm just like a dream that, the recording is ready very quickly, and we send this recording to all the people present in Baku, send them also the report and kind of for them to think about it, but not only to them, but also to people who think about peace and security in the different countries around the world. Secondly, I wanted to invite everybody here, online or in person, to our next Geneva security debate, which is, and I'm saying it in French, rapport de la Commission d'études de la politique de sécurité, Quo Vadis, which is going to be in French next week at the GCSP. We really cordially invite you to this discussion about another analysis of the security policy in Switzerland, and of course beyond. And last but not the least, I wanted to thank our speakers, Serge, Thammy, and Dominique, for their excellent inputs. I really can't wait to share the recording with all my networks because I think it was a fantastic discussion. Also, thank you to the public, to you in the room, but also those online and those who are watching us on the recording. Wishing everybody excellent rest of the day, and join me in applauding our speakers. Much. Thank you.
Thank you to you and GCSP for hosting as well.
Of course.
Thanks very much. Thank you.